Welcome to the Your Business Untethered podcast, a space for freedom seekers ready to build and scale a business that supports their wildest dreams, even while traveling the world. Hi, I'm Dina, creator of Way of the Founder, and your host. I imagine this podcast as a space where aspiring and established freedom entrepreneurs come to forge a path towards purpose, financial freedom, meaningful impact, and location independence. I'll be your guide as we defy the norm, heal old conditioning, and step into the leaders we were born to be. I myself am a firstborn, a daughter of divorcee, sister, girlfriend, professional coach, nomad, and expat of a decade plus, as well as yoga aficionado and energy healer. In my previous career, however, I worked a 9-to-5 as a professional fundraiser for American orchestras. Can you believe it? However, I needed more. I needed more freedom in my life. So 5 years ago, I called quits on resume success and claimed back the reins over my own life. What started with a one-way ticket to Vietnam and a single backpack filled to the brim has since grown into Way of the Founder, where I've helped hundreds of clients defy and heal from the path that we're told to follow, redefine freedom, fulfillment, and success on their own terms, and build impact-driven businesses that let them live and work from anywhere. Join me each week for deep dives into leadership, strategy, and mindset, as well as the healing that fuel the untethered CEO. That's you. Whether you're building your dream with a coconut flight ticket, wine glass, or coffee in hand, you are in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to another episode here of the podcast, Your Business Untethered. I don't even know where to begin to introduce today's guest, but let me share with you that if you're someone who struggles to tell your story as a part of your brand because you don't know how to be authentic, you don't know if what you're saying, what you're telling about yourself is even in integrity with you, or it feels really off, this episode is for you. If you're someone who is in a deep inner healing journey right now and realizes that maybe the story you've been telling about your life doesn't quite reflect who you are becoming or who you already have become, and there is some work that you want to do in essentially retelling your story, rewriting your story, this episode is for you. And most tangibly, if you're someone who's ready to write down their story because you know that your story needs to be told and shared and read with the world, then this episode is for you, because today we'll talk all about creative nonfiction, what it does to our inner child, to our inner world, and how to put it into a book that can actually be published. Everyone, please welcome Nicole Breit. She helps writers discover innovative ways to tell their story in a way that leads to transformation and liberation. As I learned about her process of how she works with her clients, what came to mind is she helps you heal it, write it, and publish it. Everyone, please welcome Nicole. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dina. I'm so happy and excited to be here with you today to talk about my favorite thing, personal storytelling, radical truth telling, and transformation.
I am so excited to have you with us. You know, when you reached out to us, royal us, when you reached out to me, I was just really excited. And the quick backstory that I think is really interesting to share is that I'm someone who really hates cold DMs. So when people reach out to me out of the blue, I'm always a little apprehensive, right? Because there is a lot of cold DMs out there like, oh, here's everything that's wrong with your website, your Instagram, let's fix it. And here is a link for you to pay me. And it's like, you don't even know me. You don't know my goals. You don't know my dreams. How dare you? You did the opposite of that. You reached out and you said, hey, let's connect. I think there is some synergy here. I love what you're doing. This is what I'm doing. How about we hop on a call? And the synergy that you suggested was there, absolutely, but it actually reached a lot deeper for me. When I was in Bali just a few years ago, I was going through a phase where I realized that I needed to really rewrite my own story, because the way I'd been telling the world about my story was no longer feeling authentic to me. I'd done so much inner healing, so much inner work, so much forgiveness work that I really felt ready to stop talking about certain people in my life as though they were the villain and other people in my life as though they were the angel, and started just really creating what I now call my truth. My truth. I shed other people's narratives of my life and started to create and own my truth. Now, the book is not published, and I have no intention of publishing the book, But I did start writing a book. Did start writing down my narrative, not knowing at the time that this was creative nonfiction writing. But I know just the power that writing has when it comes to healing. And I also know as a consumer the power that creative nonfiction has when it comes to reading another person's story and being able and being allowed to see myself in it and heal through that. So please tell us, what is creative nonfiction writing? Why do you love it? What has it contributed to your life? And what is it that calls you to teach others now how to do this?
Wow. Well, creative nonfiction is something that I think it was the genre I had been looking for. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I wrote poetry. I kept journals. I was a visual artist as well, which is another form of storytelling. Visual storytelling is communication as well. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s and I was learning to be a teacher. I was actually training to get my Bachelor of Education and teach elementary school, that one of our instructors gave us a book of personal essays by Barbara Kingsolver. And when I read personal essays, I thought, this is what I want to do. It's poetic, but it's personal storytelling. And then flash forward a couple more years, more than a couple more years, I was a mom. I had my daughter with my partner. And I was really struggling to get pregnant and stay pregnant. And so content warning, there was a pregnancy loss. And I knew that the way to heal was going to be through writing. I could not find a book that wasn't medical or not about that topic. Like, there were other around women's health, but I couldn't find anything specifically about pregnancy loss. So I basically wrote the book I wanted to read. And then a few years later, that was a very transformative healing process for me. A few years later, I took a course on a form called the lyric essay. And I got very excited about this because I had kind of started as a poet and a diarist, and I loved the personal essay. The lyric essay was a way to marry poetic, lyrical writing with personal storytelling in a way that I hadn't seen before. And something just kind of lit me up. And this was creative nonfiction. And to define it, I think there's different people might define it in different ways, but I always think of it as short form memoir. And creative nonfiction is a great genre for anyone who does any creative writing, because you can bring elements of fiction and poetry into it. It creative writing, but it's based in truth. And there's something about exploring our truths in writing that changes us in a way that writing fiction or I don't want to say hiding behind another form, because a lot of fiction is autobiographical, but saying, this is my story, this happened to me, pinning it down on the page, standing in your truth, and then sharing it with other people, owning your story, or as you said, Dina, rewriting your story is deeply healing work. And it's work that when I've seen writers do it in my programs and I've witnessed it, I belong to a literary community of writers working in this genre, and we're sharing our stories with each other. It's vulnerable. And I think that's part of the transformation, is you are getting to that deepest place where you're taking your mask off and you're taking off all the layers and you're finding out what's there and you're finding out who you are. So I love the work that I do. I love what it does for other. You asked me 4 questions and I don't know if I've hit them all, but for me, like the other story that I tell about, how life-changing creative nonfiction has been for me was I had a really difficult, traumatic experience in my teens. And most writers who come to me to learn the art of creative nonfiction have trauma. They have unprocessed, difficult stories. They know that they feel compelled to write. They're also scared to do it. But they know on the other side is healing. They know that if they are brave enough to do it, there is some kind of power or resolution in doing that, in telling a story that's been hard to articulate, or that there's some unprocessed emotion around. So for me, I lost my first love very unexpectedly. He passed away when we were in high school. And I just kind of went into lockdown. Like I didn't know how to grieve. Like I didn't even know where to begin. And it's funny that we're doing this today, because yesterday was 35 years, the 35th anniversary, 1990, of his death. So he's been on my mind. But it wasn't until I was able to write that story, and I wasn't able to do it until I learned about creative nonfiction and the lyric essay, which allows writers to write in a nonlinear way. Part of what had been difficult for me was I tried to start writing this story wherever it began and then wrote it through to the end, but it was hugely overwhelming. And I think that's where a lot of people get blocked and stuck. Where is the beginning? Like, where do I start? How do I get, like, what matters and what doesn't? And how do I get through it? And it wasn't until I started getting playful with form, which is what the lyric essay allows you to do, and to manage it in a smaller space, that I was able to actually get through a draft. And so the first thing I ever wrote about the two of us, I wrote it in a play format and I called it teen drama. And I created a visual timeline of events for those 9 months from kind of the beginning of the relationship to when he died. And then I just kind of like tried to draw it all out, like what were the main points. And then I wrote it in a play format. And so there was a switch that happened in my brain where I could get curious about how I was going to manage this story in this way that wasn't really a narrative. And then I kept coming back to it in different ways and different angles. And I was able to write over the course of a couple of years. I wrote exhaustively about it until I felt I'd healed. And a lot in my life changed for having written that story. And maybe that was one of the questions you asked me, like, what has this transformation done for you? It healed my relationships. It helped me love again. I ended up winning awards for the work that I had written, which opened up career opportunities, allowed me to have the confidence to teach adults and teach this work and become a coach, which has been my life for the last 8 years. So it had a profound ripple effect. But one of the effects was a feeling of confidence and power, of empowerment for taking this event that I had no control over, that was devastating. And I got to have the last word in a way by writing the story. So maybe I'll just pause there, let that be digested, and see if you have any other questions or responses.
I have lots of responses. I have lots of, stories to share of my own really in response to that, and questions as well. I want to thank you for sharing so vulnerably part of your life and sharing what creative nonfiction writing has done both for your inner world and also for your career, right? The way that I have come to understand creative nonfiction writing as someone who very intuitively got into the genre myself without even knowing what the heck I was doing. It was just flowing through me and it needed to be told. I needed to retell my story. But also someone who's now had a few conversations with you, I think of creative nonfiction writing, and you touched on that, as a way to take back control over our lives, right? And I don't mean this in the sense that, don't surrender, just hold on and cling on and control everything in your life. But no, it's a decision that we get to make, and writing helps us make the decision to relate to life in one way or the other. There's always, and we were told this, right, from the, I don't know, like 3rd grade in school, when we first started to read some novels, right, and started to learn about different characters and the protagonist and the antagonist. Like, there's always multiple truths to the same story. And through writing, we get to claim the truth that resonates most deeply with us, that represents us most authentically. And I really love that. And you also touched on the fact that the creativity of creative nonfiction writing allows us to sort of go off script in a way, right? We don't have to write from, well, this is when I was born and this is what happened, all the way through to yesterday. We get to highlight bits and pieces and snippets that stand out to us, that we know in hindsight have helped shape who we are, and thus are helping shape the narrative that we want to tell. I started writing 5-6 years ago, writing down my story chronologically, and it felt very overwhelming. By the time I got to a specific point in my life, I was just really overwhelmed. I was like, wow, like there are decades more to tell about. Like, what's the point of that? And when I returned to the book in Bali, it was just like, this situation reminds me of that. I'm going to write about that. This situation reminds me of this. I'm going to write about that. This reminds me of that. I need some healing around that. Therefore, I'm going to write about it. So we touched a little bit on how this writing process can open up our heart, can heal our heart. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about how this writing process gave you permission to advance your career. You mentioned you published a book, you won awards for it, but you also stepped out of being a teacher in a school and into teaching adults as a coach. What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, well, to have won 3 literary awards in the course of a year, like it was, first of all, I say that with humility. I was absolutely shocked that that happened, but it accelerated, like it suddenly I was part of a literary community that I had never known how to be a part of, like to be a real author. Like I was writing my whole life, but I didn't feel validated as an author until I had something published. And that connected me with a network of writers in my community, which was around Vancouver. And because I'd had that background in teaching and I had taken an online creative writing course or two, I thought, this is something I want to try. This is something I want to do, but I don't know if I'm, if what I have to share is going to help anybody, but I think I know what worked for me here. Let's see what happens if I share it with others. And so that's what I did. I created a course around experimental creative nonfiction. And one of the interesting things that you just said that I wrote down was that idea of fragments and pieces. And I just wanted to point out that sometimes that's all we have with trauma or with our childhood memories. And one of the beauties of creative nonfiction is that when you're working in formats with constraints, like, oh, I'm going to write this as a recipe. Like you can do that. Oh, I'm going to write this like a crossword puzzle. You can do that. If you don't have every detail in your memory bank, you can work with what you have and you can work with the gaps. So I was really excited to find examples of really boundary pushing work, like pushing the idea of what an essay can even be. They don't teach this in school. These are not what you learn in school when you learn how to write an essay. They're very innovative and fun. They're actually fun to write. Like if you would have told me, Nicole, you're going to write about the death of your first love and you're going to have fun. Like who would believe that, right? Or you're going to write about trauma, but you're going to enjoy it because you're going to do it in a curious and playful way. So the question was about like teaching and what that changed for me. It became clear after a few years that what I really wanted to do was go deeper with writers. And so teaching gradually transitioned into coaching for me. And we've talked, I think, a little bit about the difference for me and, just that beautiful depth and interpersonal relationship that you can have as a coach. That's kind of where I'm at now. It's led me to a couple of really beautiful relationships because this is really intimate work that we do. And the writers that I work with often tell me that the writing that they do with me, they take to therapy. It actually dovetails with their therapy. Or they have revelations and discoveries and connections in the writing that they then really want to share with their therapist. So when we're talking about how deep a process this is and what you experienced, it's very different than telling your story out loud. When you tell a story out loud, you get into a groove. And you can tell the story the same way over and over again. But there's something that breaks that narrative when you sit down and write about it.
For sure, yeah.
All about the power.
Your thoughts have to slow down, right?
And doing it by hand really slows it down. I don't know. I have a few ways that I like to work, but I find maybe because I began with journaling and diaries, but writing by hand. And I also have an ADHD brain, so I can trip over my fast brain. But if I have to slow down and handwrite, it does help me stay grounded. Yeah.
What I love about this is that there is a direct parallel between the conversation we're having about writing and how healing the process is and creating a business. Now, where is the parallel, you ask, right? When we create a business and we step out of employment into entrepreneurship, or even when we have been running our business for years and suddenly the business no longer feels aligned and we look around and we go, what the fuck is going on? I need to make a change, but I don't know what the change is. Writing gives us the permission we need as humans to forge our own path, right? It gives us permission to break away from an old societal expectation that no longer serves us, from a belief that no longer serves us, from a limiting belief even, a narrative that, sure, helped us who we are today, but no longer is helpful as we move into the future. And it's that inner work that we need to do in order to be able to confidently or bravely quit our job and step into entrepreneurship shoes. Or to look at the last 3 years in business and go, it's great that I've achieved all of this success in my business for the last 3 years, but now I want to do something a little different. And I'm going to, again, give myself permission to change the narrative, right? And you hear me say this all the time. You have to do the inner work. You have to let go of these inner blockages and your childhood baggage, unpack it in order to create a business that's truly soul aligned. So I want to hear a little more about, for someone who's new to the process, Nicole, where would I start? I know it's a very open-ended question, but where do I start?
That's a great question. And I think there's nothing like journaling to ask oneself the questions, reflective questions. And even when I'm teaching storytelling, I tell the writers I work with, if you are stuck or blocked in a separate journal that we're going to call your processing journal, you are going to ask questions because your inner wisdom knows, and your story is actually smarter than you are. You're there to be in receptive mode and to receive the answers that you know. So a processing journal would be the place separate from where you're storytelling, where you're doing that kind of writing, to say, I'm stuck and I don't know why. What is the thing I'm avoiding? What is the thing that, I know when I write through it, I'll get to the answer, to the other side of this block. What is holding me back? And then listen for the answer and write it down. And I think that's a practice we can use in our businesses. Why am I stuck right now? Where is my growth limit? What is blocking me? And listen and write down the answer and trust that you actually have the answer. It's in the process of writing about it and reflecting that we can get those insights that come from that deep place, not somebody else telling you. You already know. So I think that's one tool or technique that I use in teaching creative nonfiction that I think is very applicable to the creative work of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely agree with that. It's a beautiful way to reconnect and tap back into your intuition. Your intuition knows. You just have to learn to listen to her again. So let's fast forward just a little bit. Let's assume that the book's already been written. What now? What's the process like that you help your clients and the world step through in order to get the book published?
So what I recommend is kind of the opposite approach than maybe one would expect, where you think, oh, well, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to spend a year or however long it takes. Maybe you get a download like you do and it happens really fast. Now I have to go figure out how to sell it, or I have to go find an agent. And now, like, how does that all work? The beauty of creative nonfiction is that you're writing shorter pieces that you can start submitting all along. And you can write a whole book this way, in short, linked, connected pieces. And so what I learned, I hired a mentor when I was first trying to figure out how to get published. And she was the one who said, before you think you're ready, start submitting these shorter pieces to contests and literary journals. And that's what I did. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have had those award nominations or, all that fast tracked my career. So the beauty of this is that if your work is vulnerable, and it probably is because you're telling the truth about your life, having those shorter pieces published sooner than later helps you get used to that feeling of sharing your work publicly. And it helps you to build a CV of publications so that when you're finished your larger book project, you've already been published in some places. So now you have a book and you're going to write a letter to a publisher or a press, and you can say, I've already been published here, here, and here. And I've been nominated for this award, or I've won this award, and they're going to pay attention versus you ignored because you thought you had to do this in step by step. You've never published anything anywhere, and your book is competing against all of these other manuscripts. You have a much better chance if you've been doing this bit by bit all along. And then you get that validation sooner too. Everybody wants to have an acceptance and go, oh, I've been published here. I'm a real writer now. Why wait until your book, that could take a few years to get published, finally gets out there? And not every book does. So there's a delay there that you can avoid by doing this work in shorter pieces and getting them published all along while you're finishing your manuscript and then are ready to share with the world.
This is fascinating. Okay. So just right off the bat, just relating this back to entrepreneurship, right? So often new entrepreneurs get stuck in the corporate thinking of this has to be perfect, and no one gets to see it until it's perfect, right? And that really hinders not just growth, but it hinders progress, actual revenue that you can bring into your business. Because guess what? Your audience isn't looking for perfection. Your audience is looking for a true connection. So better let it be a little imperfect and maybe not quite what it is that you want to say, but begin to build that connection. Now, this is the process that you're describing, right? Build a connection with your audience, build a connection with, what it feels like to be published and to have other people read your book, build a connection with the industry and with potential, either people who can introduce you to an agent or people who are an agent and can help you get your book once it's ready, published ultimately. So I want to just, make sure that I'm understanding the process that you're suggesting accurately. Or use self-publishing and submitting the snippets from the book to literary contests, etc. Or is there a middleman who helps you with this?
There is no middleman. And I wouldn't call it self-publishing because that suggests, publishing something on Amazon or another non-traditional or self-publishing platform. So there are a number of literary, creative nonfiction, poetry, and fiction contests, short form contests that are very easy to look up and search. Read literary magazines. There's so many of them online. And just as another hint, creative nonfiction is the fastest growing genre, but it's also the least competitive to get published because fewer people submit. Literary journals get probably half the entries for creative nonfiction than they do for fiction and poetry. So that automatically makes your odds much better. So even if you had the dream of writing a novel, write creative nonfiction and start submitting it so that you get those publications and get your novel published because you've already got these publication credits to your name. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
So there's a difference between publishing a story versus just having publications under your belly, which come about by submitting to literary contests.
Mm-hmm. And journals, all of those places where you can read creative nonfiction, they need submissions. So that's what I did. That's what I did.
So,
and I wanted to say too, I'm so sorry, is that you were talking about perfectionism and that, like holding out on doing things until you're sure you can do it perfectly. Writers are the worst at being able to judge their own work. And every writer I've ever worked with thinks that their story is terrible. They do not see what's working. So often, when you're scared to submit because you don't think it's good enough, it's probably much better than you actually think it is. So just a note of encouragement. And what you said is absolutely right. Yeah. Authenticity, voice, truth, that's what resonates in a piece, not something technically perfect that doesn't have any energy or life force.
So just a quick follow-up. What is like the go-to literary journal that you would recommend someone who is new to this industry to start subscribing to and reading?
Go to Brevity magazine. So Brevity is great because of the caliber of writers that are submitting, because of the variety of forms you're going to see, and because they only publish work 750 words or less. And so it has to fit that criteria. So it can show you how much of a story can actually be shared in a very short space. The other beautiful thing about short form creative nonfiction is where it can take a year or two to write a long form book. You can write a 750 word piece in a week. And you can write lots of them and keep submitting them and getting them out there and just increasing those odds of getting the publications, the publication acceptances. I also love Hippocampus magazine. The New Quarterly is another one. There are just so many out there and lots of new ones, but those I think would be my three favorites because of the variety of styles and formats. The Diagram is another really great one. They do a lot of visual essays. So if you love drawing or schematics or visual art, you will find a way to tell your story by reading the kinds of submissions that they publish.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much for this. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about your book. You have a book coming out called Bloom Letters on Girlhood. Tell us about it.
Yes, it's coming out this fall, September 2025. It's a project that my friend Claire Sickerman invited me to collaborate with her on. She asked me if I would like to write a co-authored memoir in letters about the transition from girlhood to womanhood. So we both grew up in the late 80s, early 90s in the suburbs of Vancouver. We did not know each other as teenagers. We met in our 20s. So writing letters back and forth to each other was a way of getting to know the younger versions of ourselves and to talk about all of those firsts, all of the awkwardness, all of the confusion of going through adolescence. We wanted to talk about first periods. We wanted to talk about bras. We wanted to talk about dating and consent and body image and all that stuff. And as we wrote to each other, what we realized what our book was truly about, the overarching theme was what was the impact of patriarchy and misogyny on the development of, our development into women, and how we were influenced in so many ways, from the ways we were mothered and our mothers tried to protect us, what they hid from us, the shame to kind of keep us in line, the things that were unspeakable, the rules of dating, the fear of using our voices, our friendships, the challenges we had as girls in our friendships. All of it kept leading us back to that realization of the culture that we were living in. And it's really interesting to write about girlhood and the teenage years reflecting as 50-year-old women. We were in our late 40s and turned 50 over the course of writing it over 2.5, 3 years, because we were able to see the humor in it and in our goofy teenage voices. But by the end, we also felt very empowered for having said the things we couldn't say at the time, make sense of, and the connections that we weren't making at the time, and to stand in our power now and say, look at how we've changed. Look at how we're still becoming women. We're still becoming ourselves, and we're going to keep blooming, but we're going to do it with the awareness of what we gathered and learned now from these conversations about that time.
I cannot wait to read the book. Like, I just went into a bit of a
trance.
Into a bit of a state. I was like, okay, where's the book? Can I go and read it now? I mean, I'm sure I could if I hacked into a laptop. But for those of us who aren't hackers, can we pre-save it? Pre-save it already? Where will we be able to find it?
Yeah, it's still a couple of months off before pre-orders. But if you are interested in the essays, the letters, the first letters that we wrote back and forth to each other were about first periods, and they have been published in an anthology called Awfully Hilarious Period Pieces, created by Heather Hendry. Yeah. Period pieces. The whole book is about periods. And the youngest contributor is like 11 and hadn't had her period yet. And the oldest contributor had been through menopause. And it's an incredible book. And it's just so, so amazing. Claire, my co-author, found the call for submissions, and it was absolutely perfect for what we were working on. And so we submitted it. We got the acceptance. The book came out on International Women's Day last year, and it won an award, actually. So the next one that she's putting out is called Pillow Talk, and it's funny sex stories. So I want to submit to that one too.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Like, it just, this is a whole list of books that I need to go and read and have fun with and find myself within as well. So I could talk to you for ages, and I just keep seeing the importance of this process that you teach for entrepreneurs, specifically for entrepreneurs who want to build a life of freedom, because freedom, as we all know, is a mindset. It's a healing journey first and a strategy second, right? And your process is just so important to helping us find our truth, our story, the narrative that really empowers us via healing and thus empowers other people. And so I want to ask you, what is an action step? And I say action step loosely, right? What is an invitation that you want to offer to the audience to begin engaging in over the next 7 to 30 days?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm thinking about this is so much about how do we do this without getting overwhelmed? How do we take the first smallest step? And if you haven't done creative writing in years and you're blocked and you're even just trying to, follow another person's advice and, how do I do this? I think it begins with our origin stories. And I would invite you I want you to do this with care and play and curiosity. And I would just invite you to go look through some photo albums. Look at old pictures and see what kinds of memories those pictures bring up for you. And we don't have to go to a 10 out of 10 trauma or whatever, just the simplest things, the simplest memories, the joyful memories, and just write a short piece. Give yourself like a word count limit. I really talk a lot about creative constraints because innovation happens in these boundaried parameters that we create. So, for example, you can actually tell a lot in a 100-word story. If you were to look at a photograph and really focus on an image, something that stands out and described it and just a moment of change, and you did it in 100 words, and you have to be strict on the 100 words because that's going to make, you're going to have to make hard choices about what to include and what to take out. That's where I would begin. Begin with a photograph, write 100 words, focus on an image, a feeling, a change, because a story is a moment in which we are becoming something else. We are not the same person at the beginning of the story as we are at the end, even if it's only 100 words. So another way to look at this is, or an alternate exercise would be to think of a moment of change where you were someone at the beginning of the story and you know that you became someone else after an event, and try and write that in exactly 100. So those are two small little creative nonfiction. And by the way, there are journals looking for 100-word stories. So if you're keen to get published, go write 10 of them. They won't take you long, and start submitting them.
It just brings it all back together, right? It's like, here's the healing, and now here's how you do it. And also here, by the way, you can publish 100 words. You don't need more than 100 words. How cool is that? Nicole, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming and sharing your wisdom, your journey with us, the process that you help people step through in order to heal their story, write it, and publish it. How can people work with you, and where can we find you? I know you brought a bit of a special gift for the listeners of this podcast as well.
Absolutely. I'm really proud of this program that I created that brings in everything I know about writing creative nonfiction, from story idea to actually where to start submitting your work for publication. It's a 12-month program. It includes monthly write-ins, so you get to hang out with me once a month and write with me in our lovely community. So that program is one that I'd really like to invite your listeners to, with a little special gift that you're going to share with them. But also, if you want to find me, my favorite place to hang out right now is Substack. I have a Substack called Naked, Writing Intimate Creative Nonfiction. The whole purpose there is to be in community with writers who are taking off their clothes, metaphorically, like peeling back the layers, trying to get to the heart of their truth and share it, understanding that this is highly vulnerable work, and it's probably better to do it with a sympathetic community. So some of the things that I write about on my Substack are, how do we honor our need for privacy and boundaries while writing really intimate work, because we want to be authentic and we want to share. Maybe our work isn't meant for, our families to read. So how do we create, how do we do this work in a way that is safe and supported while telling truths that might be hard to access and hard to talk about at dinner, but it feels essential to us as storytellers to do this work and to read other people who are doing this work. So come find me over on Substack.
I love that. And that last part that you just mentioned, I feel like that could be a whole separate episode for us to talk about. How do you write about shit that you don't want your family to hear, right? And I imagine for a lot of writers, coming writers and veteran writers, that's a really big holdup, right? Like, can I publish this in a way so that my mom doesn't find out about the book, right? So everyone, if you have that concern, please go and check out the Substack mentioned. We will link it in the show notes. And if you are ready to really step through this process of writing your story and publishing it, and want Nicole's help, then Spark Your Story is the place to be. We do have a very special invitation for you guys in the show notes, so definitely check this out for details. And the only thing that remains to say for me is to, again, say thank you to you, Nicole. Thank you to the listeners for, I'm going to say thank you for allowing yourselves to stick around, because this is really important and potentially a bit of an uncomfortable episode to be listening to. And I'm really proud of everyone who has given themselves permission to have their eyes opened to a really beautiful and creative way of telling and retelling their story and changing or writing the next chapter of their lives. As always, create more freedom today than you did yesterday, and please utilize the invitation shared with you today on this episode to find your freedom, to find your voice, and to create more freedom through writing. I'll catch you next week in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, Your Business Untethered, hosted by me, Dinat, creator of Way of the Founder. I love hearing from you, so please drop me a DM on Instagram sharing your insights from this episode. And if you are ready to take the leap, my free guide to plot your 9-to-5 escape in 7 days and the Freedom Business Scorecard are in the show notes for you to grab. If this episode created change for you, please leave a review and be a friend and share this with a friend or colleague that you love. Until next time, please wake every day, seize the day, defy the norm, and create your very own type of freedom. I love you. I do mean it.